Okay, so you've hit us up with like a ton of info on steroid cycles, huh? What we're going to do here is sort of break it all down for you, help you get a good grasp on the essentials without drowning in like all the super technical stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Think of it as your express lane to really understanding this stuff. You've sent over some FAQs and a bunch of other materials.
Right.
And our goal today is to give you a solid overview, hit the common steroids people are talking about, how these cycles actually work, what people think they're getting out of them, and of course, the big one, the risks that come with all this.
Yeah.
Right off the bat, one thing that really jumps out is just how many different substances there are and how tailored these cycles can get. It all seems to depend on what someone's trying to achieve.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Looking at what you sent, it's clear that what steroid someone chooses really depends on what they're after. Like, are they going for some serious muscle gain? Are they trying to cut fat? Or are they focused on, boosting strength?
Right, right.
Experience level also plays a big part in those choices.
Of course, yeah.
And then there's the practical side of things, too. What's actually available.
Okay, so let's start unpacking some of these I guess you could say key players, right?
Sure.
The materials you shared mention a few anabolic steroids over and over. Testosterone, for example, that keeps popping up.
Yeah.
It seems like that's often the base, like the foundation of a lot of these cycles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Whether it's enanthate, cypionate, or propionate, right?
Testosterone, in its various forms, is definitely a cornerstone. It's the main male sex hormone. And these different esters you mentioned, they basically determine how fast that testosterone gets released into the bloodstream after it's taken. So the choice of ester kind of dictates how often someone has to use it. You could almost think of it like different types of time-release pills for a medication, making sure the levels stay steady.
Yeah, that analogy makes total sense. Then there's trenbolone. The sources really hammer home how potent this stuff is, and how it's a popular choice when the main goals are cutting fat and packing on some serious strength.
Yeah.
It definitely sounds like one of the more hardcore compounds out there.
It is. Trenbolone is known for having very strong anabolic effects.
Oh, okay.
Meaning it's really effective at building muscle tissue. And it also has significant androgenic effects, which that's related to developing those male characteristics. That high potency is why it's sought after for those specific goals, but it also means the potential for side effects is a lot more pronounced with trenbolone.
Gotcha. And what about nandrolone? We see that a lot as decanoate or phenylpropionate.
Right.
The info mentions muscle building, of course, but also the possibility of some joint relief. That's an interesting double benefit, or at least a perceived benefit, right?
Yeah, it is an interesting aspect. Nandrolone, for some people, does seem to offer some relief from joint issues on top of its muscle-building properties. Again, those decanoate and phenylpropionate versions, they're just different esters that affect how long the nandrolone stays active in the body.
Okay, so it's kind of like the time release thing we talked about with testosterone.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Now we've got Dianabol, or methandrostenolone. That's described as a super potent oral steroid.
Yeah.
Mostly for bulking and getting those quick strength gains. The fact that it's oral seems important. And I know we'll dig into oral versus injectable a bit later.
Right. Dianabol is a fast-acting oral, and it's pretty popular because it can lead to noticeable gains in muscle and strength pretty quickly. But because it's oral, it goes through the liver. That's something to keep in mind when it comes to potential stress on the liver. Most other orals are processed differently, so this one, it kind of hits the liver in a unique way.
Okay. Lastly, in this initial rundown, we've got Winstrol, also known as stanozolol. And this one comes in both oral and injectable forms.
Yeah.
The sources point this one out for its use in cutting cycles, helping with muscle definition and that hard look. So another one that seems geared towards a really specific aesthetic goal.
Right. Winstrol was often used towards the end of a cutting cycle.
Okay.
To help reduce water retention, which can make the muscles look more ripped and, hard.
Yeah.
The fact that it comes in both oral and injectable gives users different options depending on what they prefer.
Gotcha. Now, it's really important to point out, and the material you sent does this too, that this isn't like an exhaustive list.
Yeah, for sure.
The world of these substances is always changing, right?
Absolutely.
And crucially, and we can't stress this enough, using these without a valid prescription, from a doctor It carries some serious health risks,
Mm-hmm.
and it's often illegal.
Absolutely. This is just a quick look at some of the more commonly talked about compounds, just to give you a basic understanding. The legal and health implications are a huge deal, and they shouldn't be taken lightly.
Okay, so we've got a sense of some of the big names, the substances involved.
Right.
Now let's talk about how they're actually used, the whole idea of a cycle.
Okay.
How long do these cycles usually last?
Well, the sources say that cycle length can vary quite a bit,
Okay.
but a common range seems to be between 6 and 12 weeks.
Okay.
But that's not set in stone.
Mm-hmm.
People who are new to this might start with shorter cycles,
Makes sense?
maybe to see how their body reacts, and to minimize any potential side effects. And more experienced users, they might go for longer cycles.
So what determines how long a cycle should be? It can't just be a matter of personal preference, right?
There are definitely a few factors involved. The specific steroids being used is a big one.
Okay.
Like we said before, oral steroids, because of their impact on the liver, they're often used for shorter periods compared to injectables.
Right.
Dosage also matters. Higher doses can increase the risk of side effects, which might lead someone to opt for a shorter cycle.
Makes sense.
And of course, the individual's goals are central. Someone aiming to bulk up might have a different cycle length than someone mainly focused on, cutting fat.
Yeah, that makes sense. The info also mentions that longer cycles can make side effects more likely and more severe.
Mm-hmm.
And they can also extend the suppression of your body's natural hormone production. That sounds pretty bad.
It is. Your body's endocrine system, the one that produces hormones, it needs time to bounce back after being exposed to external hormones. Longer cycles can make that recovery process tougher, and it can take a lot longer.
Now, the term stacking pops up in the FAQs.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means when we're talking about steroid cycles?
Stacking, according to the sources, means using 2 or more different anabolic steroids at the same time within a single cycle. The idea is to try and get what's called a synergistic effect.
Okay.
The thinking is that combining the different properties of various steroids will give you better overall results
Okay.
in terms of muscle growth, strength gains, or fat loss, more than using just one steroid on its own.
So it's like you're trying to get a wider range of benefits by using different substances that have different strengths.
Exactly. For instance, someone might stack a steroid that's known for building muscle with another one that's better for boosting strength.
Right, right.
Or they might combine a really anabolic compound with one that has a lower androgenic profile
Okay.
to try and manage potential side effects,
Mm.
like hair loss, for example. But it's important to note that while the goal is to get more benefits, the risk of side effects can also go up.
And the information also points out a pretty big drawback to this whole stacking thing.
Yeah, and this is crucial to understand. Stacking automatically increases the chance of adverse effects. You're basically exposing your body to the risks of multiple drugs at once.
Right.
And sometimes those risks can be even worse because of how different substances interact inside the body.
Okay, so after a cycle, the body's natural hormone production has been messed with.
Right.
That's where post-cycle therapy, or PCT, comes in. What's the main goal here?
The main goal of PCT, as the sources clearly state, is to help your body start making testosterone naturally again.
Okay.
During a cycle, when you introduce those external hormones, your body senses those high levels, and it basically reduces or even completely stops its own production.
Okay.
This suppression of what's called the HPTA, the hypothalamic pituitary testicular axis, it's a normal reaction, physiologically speaking.
So PCT is meant to, jumpstart that system again.
Exactly. Yeah. PCT usually involves using specific medications that help stimulate the HPTA and get the body to start making its own testosterone again. The sources mention SERMs, selective estrogen receptor modulators, like clomiphene citrate, also known as Clomid, and tamoxifen citrate, which is Nolvadex.
Okay.
Those are common choices. Sometimes human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG, is used too.
And the length of PCT and the specific meds used, that's not a one-size-fits-all thing either, I'm guessing.
No, it really depends on the specifics of the cycle. Things like how long the cycle was, the dosages used, and the individual's response. Those all play a role in figuring out the right PCT protocol. More intense or longer cycles generally need a more comprehensive and possibly longer PCT period.
The information you gave us really stresses the bad stuff that can happen if you skip PCT. Prolonged low testosterone, that doesn't sound good at all.
Not good at all. Without the right PCT, people can experience long periods of low testosterone, which can lead to losing some of the muscle they gained during the cycle, feeling more tired, having a lower sex drive, and other issues that come with low testosterone.
Okay, let's get into something really important here, the potential side effects. The sources list a whole bunch of them.
They do, and it's super important to understand that these side effects can be really different from person to person,
Right.
and they depend on a bunch of factors. The sources talk about short-term and long-term effects, and they're also affected by the specific drugs, the dosage, how long they're used, and the individual's genes and overall health.
On the maybe more common and less severe end, we're talking about things like acne, hair loss, especially if you're prone to it genetically, gynecomastia, which is when men develop breast tissue because of a hormone imbalance,
Right.
water retention, and of course the famous mood swings and increased aggression, what people call roid rage.
Exactly. These are often the side effects that are most obvious right away. And while they might be considered less serious than the long-term risks, they can still have a big impact on someone's quality of life and how they feel mentally.
But then the sources talk about some more serious potential side effects, and these sound really scary.
Hmm.
Cardiovascular problems like high blood pressure, increased risk of heart attack and stroke, liver damage, especially with oral steroids, kidney problems, enlarged prostate, and the continued suppression of natural testosterone production.
Those are the risks that can have the biggest long-term impact on your health.
Yeah.
The effects on the heart and blood vessels are a major concern because steroids can really mess with cholesterol levels and blood pressure. The potential for damage to organs like the liver and kidneys is also really serious.
Mm.
And having low testosterone for a long time can affect your overall health in a lot of ways.
And the information also specifically mentions risks for women, those virilization effects, like a deeper voice, facial and body hair growth, and irregular periods. These are often permanent changes, right?
Exactly. For women, the possibility of these masculinizing effects is something to really consider. And it's often a big reason why they decide against using steroids, especially since they can be permanent in a lot of cases.
Let's shift gears a bit and talk about the difference between oral and injectable steroids.
Sure.
The sources lay out some key differences.
The main difference, as the sources explain, is how they're taken and how your body processes them.
Right.
Oral steroids are taken by mouth, and to survive that first trip through the digestive system and liver, they're often chemically altered,
Okay.
usually through a process called 17-alpha alkylation.
Gotcha.
This modification allows them to get into the bloodstream effectively.
And that change, while it's needed for oral steroids, it comes with a potential downside for the liver, right?
Yeah, exactly. That alkylation can put a lot of stress on the liver, and it carries the risk of hepatotoxicity, or liver damage. Oral steroids also tend to have a shorter half-life in the body,
Okay.
which means they have to be taken more often throughout the day to keep blood levels steady.
Gotcha. Injectable steroids, on the other hand, they bypass that initial processing by the liver, right?
Right. Injectables are put directly into the muscle, so they don't go through that first pass metabolism in the liver, which is generally less stressful for the organ. They're also often esterified, meaning they have a fatty acid molecule attached to the steroid. This ester slows down how fast the steroid gets released from the injection site into the blood. This results in a longer half-life, meaning you don't need to inject as often compared to taking oral doses.
Okay. Now, the sources also mention aromatase inhibitors, or AIs. What do these do in the context of a steroid cycle?
Aromatase inhibitors are drugs that some people use during a cycle to try and manage their estrogen levels. The aromatase enzyme is what converts testosterone and other androgens into estrogen. In men, high estrogen levels can lead to unwanted side effects like gynecomastia, water retention, and more body fat.
So AIs are used to block that conversion process.
Exactly. By inhibiting the aromatase enzyme, they can help keep estrogen levels in a more normal range and potentially lower the risk of those estrogen-related side effects. The sources mention some common AIs like anastrozole, which is Arimidex, letrozole or Femara, and exemestane, which is Aromacin.
But the sources also give a word of caution here. Completely shutting down estrogen isn't necessarily good either, right?
That's a really important point. While the goal is often to control high estrogen levels, completely getting rid of estrogen can also be bad. Estrogen plays important roles in different body functions, like keeping bones healthy, regulating cholesterol levels, and even supporting libido in men. So using AIs needs to be carefully considered, and it often involves monitoring through blood tests to make sure estrogen levels don't get too low. It's a tricky balance.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of the individual parts.
Mm-hmm.
How do people actually put all this together when planning a cycle? What are the main things they think about?
The sources highlight a few key factors that people usually consider when putting together a steroid cycle. Their main goals are the most important.
Right.
Are they looking to bulk up a lot, cut fat to show off those muscles, increase raw strength, or improve their athletic performance? These goals will really influence the choice of steroids, the dosages, and the whole structure of the cycle. For example, someone who wants to bulk might choose compounds known for their anabolic effects,
Okay.
while someone cutting might prioritize those that help with fat loss and hardening those muscles.
Experience level seems like another big factor that comes up.
Definitely.
Someone just starting out probably shouldn't jump into some super complicated plan, right?
Absolutely. Beginners are usually advised to start with milder compounds at lower doses to see how their body reacts,
Makes sense.
and to minimize the risk of side effects. They might also start with a cycle using just one type of steroid to better understand its effects. As they get more experience, they might then think about more complex stacks and higher doses.
And the specific properties of the different steroids themselves, like their anabolic and androgenic ratios, their potential for side effects, how long they stay active in the body, all of that plays a role in the selection process, right?
Absolutely. Someone might choose a steroid with a higher anabolic rating if their main goal is muscle growth. Or they might consider the androgenic effects if they're worried about side effects like acne or hair loss. The half-life of a steroid is also really important because it determines how often the substance needs to be taken to keep those blood levels stable. For instance, a steroid with a shorter half-life will need to be taken more often than one with a longer half-life. To give a hypothetical example, if someone's main goal is bulking with potentially fewer androgenic side effects, they might consider compounds with a higher anabolic to androgenic ratio and maybe a shorter half-life to allow for quicker adjustments if side effects do show up.
The person's own health history seems like a really critical factor that needs to be considered too.
It's absolutely essential. Pre-existing health conditions can be made a lot worse by steroid use, so understanding your own health is really important. However, it's important to say again that using these substances without medical supervision is still extremely risky, regardless of how healthy you are right now.
And lastly, the sources mention the practical stuff, like availability and legality.
Yeah, unfortunately. The fact that it's illegal to get these substances without a prescription often affects what people have access to. However, it's essential to really emphasize once again the serious health risks and potential legal problems that come with getting and using steroids without a real prescription. The sources are right to advise against it and to strongly warn against asking medical professionals for guidance on illegal performance enhancement.
If you are interested in more topics like this, or you want to order stacks, you can do so by visiting publichealthlaw.best website. So visit publichealthlaw.best to get your bulking, cutting, and strength stacks for maximum results.
So putting it all together, based on what you've shared, understanding steroid cycles is pretty complicated.
Seems like it, yeah.
It involves thinking carefully about different substances, how long the cycles last, possible combinations, and being really aware of the serious health risks.
Right.
It's definitely not a decision to be made lightly.
Yeah, for sure.
Actually, given what we've talked about, it really highlights how important it is to be fully informed about everything before even thinking about doing any of this.
Absolutely. This deep dive, based on the info you gave us, has hopefully given you a much clearer basic understanding of the different types of steroids that are out there, the key things involved in putting together a cycle, and maybe most importantly, the big health risks that are a part of this whole thing.
This brings up a big question, doesn't it? Considering how complicated and risky steroid use is, what does it really mean to try and enhance your performance this way? And what are some of the less obvious trade-offs, not just physical, but maybe also psychological or social, that people might face when they make these choices?
If you are interested in more topics like this, or you want to order stacks, you can do so by visiting publichealthlaw.best website. So visit publichealthlaw.best to get your bulking, cutting, and strength stacks for maximum results. Disclaimer: the content of our podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only.